I want you to think about the last time something just totally, genuinely random happened to you.
Right, the kind of thing you just can't plan for.
Exactly. I mean, the kind of chaotic coincidence that just completely derails your routine. Like maybe you missed your usual morning train by, I don't know, 10 seconds because you couldn't find your keys.
We've all been there.
Yeah, and because you were late, you ended up running into an old friend on the street who, out of nowhere, offered you a new job. Or, let's look at the flip side of that.
The bad luck side.
Right. Maybe a pipe bursts in your apartment on the exact day you had the absolute most important presentation of your career. It totally ruins your morning, your suit, and, your confidence. What did your brain do in that exact moment?
It probably went into overdrive trying to explain it.
Yes. If you are like pretty much every human being currently walking the planet, I can almost guarantee you didn't just stand there in the flooding water and accept it as pure mathematical probability.
No, nobody does that.
You probably tried to find a reason. You thought, I was meant to see that friend. The universe was pushing me toward that job. Or, in the case of the pipe, the universe is punishing me for cutting off that guy in traffic yesterday.
It's just a classic reaction.
We all do it. We constantly, almost obsessively, try to force a cohesive narrative onto pure chaos.
We do. And the impulse is so universal and honestly so deeply automatic that we rarely pause to ask why it even exists in the first place.
Right, we just accept it.
Exactly. When we catch ourselves doing it, we tend to assume it's just a philosophical quirk of being human. We think of it as a sort of poetic lens we place over our lives to make the day-to-day grind feel just a bit more palatable.
Like we just tell ourselves it's human nature to be storytellers.
Yeah, but what if it isn't poetry at all? What if that desperate search for a reason or, the meaning of life isn't a higher order philosophical pursuit?
Wait, you're saying it's something else?
I'm saying, what if it's actually a hardwired biological mechanism?
Oh, wow. All right. So today we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating, incredibly dense research paper by Victor H. Sertouche. It's titled The Evolutionary and Cognitive Architecture of Meaning.
It's a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. And the core mission for our discussion today, the thing we really want to pull apart for you, is a highly provocative idea that Sertouche puts forward. He argues that humanity's search for cosmic meaning is, at its core, an evolutionary glitch.
A survival mechanism, essentially.
Right, a survival mechanism designed to moralize random chaos so our ancient ancestors wouldn't get eaten. Okay, let's unpack this because this paper bridges evolutionary biology, developmental psychology, anthropology, theology, and even the history of American blues music.
It covers a massive amount of ground.
It does, and it uses all of that to explain why your brain absolutely refuses to accept pure coincidence.
The paper represents a really remarkable synthesis of disciplines that, frankly, don't usually communicate with one another. Our ultimate goal today is to understand not just what our brains are doing when they're confronted with unpredictable events, but the deep mechanical why behind that behavior.
The actual wiring.
Exactly. I really invite you, the listener, to question your own baseline assumptions as we go through this. Think about your views on fate, on luck, and on cosmic justice.
Because it gets pretty wild.
It does. Because once you begin to see the neurological and evolutionary architecture that props up your own meaning-making, it fundamentally shifts how you evaluate your reactions to the world around you.
Right. And, to understand why we seek meaning today, sitting in our climate-controlled offices or cars, we really have to go back, like way back.
Millions of years.
Yeah. We have to look at what was actively trying to kill our ancestors millions of years ago in the African savanna, because that is where the hardware we're currently running was actually built.
That is the absolute necessary starting point. The evolutionary trajectory of Homo sapiens and our hominid ancestors before us unfolded in a landscape defined by extreme volatility.
Just constant danger.
Constant existential threat. We're talking about an environment filled with apex predators, hostile rival groups, sudden and catastrophic environmental shifts, and, well, a constant scarcity of resources.
Not a great place to sit around and philosophize.
Not at all.
Sure.
In that specific environment, the human brain did not evolve to be a purely rational, objective scientific instrument. It just wasn't designed to calculate statistical probabilities with cold detachment.
So what was it designed for?
It evolved as a predictive organ optimized for one single overriding metric, which is survival.
Which brings up a massive concept from the research that I think perfectly explains this. It's called error management theory, or EMT.
Yes, EMT is crucial here.
Okay, so if the brain is a predictive organ, EMT is basically the algorithm it uses to handle bad data, right?
That's a highly accurate way to frame it, actually. Error management theory is foundational to understanding our cognitive architecture. It suggests that when the brain is processing ambiguous sensory data.
Which is basically everything on the savannah.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of the data available back then was ambiguous, so the brain is forced to make rapid judgments. And when making those judgments, the brain can really only make two distinct types of errors.
Oh, we break those down for us.
The first is a type I error. In statistics, this is known as a false positive. In cognitive terms, this is when you perceive a meaningful pattern or an intentional agent where none actually exists.
Let me put an analogy to this just to make sure I'm tracking. So you are an early hominid walking through tall grass.
Okay.
You hear the wind rustling in a bush nearby. Your brain immediately screams, "That's a predator. It's a leopard."
You panic.
Yeah, you react accordingly. But it turns out it's literally just the wind. You perceived an agent like a hungry, intentional animal that just wasn't there. That's a type I error.
That is the classic type I error. Now, the second type of mistake the brain can make is a type 2 error, which is a false negative.
So missing something that is there.
Precisely. This is when you fail to perceive a real pattern or a real intentional agent when it actually is present.
Okay, so that's the reverse scenario. You hear the rustling bush, you assume it's just the wind blowing through the leaves, so you stay totally relaxed.
You don't react at all.
Right. But it actually is a leopard waiting to pounce.
And that distinction is exactly where the evolutionary pressure comes into play. Consider the cost asymmetry between those two errors in terms of survival and reproductive fitness.
Yes, cost asymmetry, meaning which one hurts you more?
Exactly. This is the absolute crux of error management theory. If you make a type I error, you think the wind is a leopard, what does it actually cost you out there in the wild?
Well, you get a rush of adrenaline, your heart rate spikes, you probably sprint 100 yards in the opposite direction for no reason.
Right.
So you burn some calories and maybe you look a little foolish to the rest of the tribe.
It's a very minor metabolic cost. You waste some energy, but crucially, you survive. But consider the type 2 error.
You false negative.
Right. Yeah. You think the leopard is just the wind. The cost of that error is frequently immediate mortality.
You get eaten.
You are eaten. You are permanently removed from the gene pool. And, more importantly, from an evolutionary perspective, you do not pass on your genetic predisposition for being highly relaxed and statistically objective.
Oh, wow. So natural selection is literally weeding out the people who try to be rational about ambiguous noise.
It absolutely is. Evolutionary pressure, relentlessly selected for cognitive modules that are heavily predisposed toward what psychologists call patternicity and agenticity.
Making patterns and finding agent.
Yes. We are neurobiologically wired to err on the side of extreme caution. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the survivors were the ones whose brains automatically imposed structure, causality, and agency onto stochastic random noise.
Because doing so kept us alive.
It was the only way to stay alive.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, our entire sense of cosmic meaning, this beautiful, poetic, philosophical quest we've been on for millennia, finding purpose in the stars and in our struggles,
Yes.
all of that stems from the fact that being a little bit paranoid kept our ancestors from being eaten.
The mechanism that causes you to jump at a shadow in a dark alley is the exact same mechanism that causes you to seek a grand design in the universe.
That is wild.
It really is. Cognitive scientists of religion, specifically Justin Barrett and Stuart Guthrie, formulated a model for this. They call it the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HADD.
HAD. Okay, how does that work?
Well, HADD is an evolved subreflective cognitive module.
Subreflective meaning you don't even think about it.
Exactly. It operates entirely below the level of conscious thought. It fires automatically whenever an object violates our intuitive assumptions about physical mechanics.
Give me an example of a violation. Like, are we talking about something moving when it shouldn't?
That is a primary trigger, yes.
Yeah.
If something moves on a non-inertial path, like a vine that suddenly twitches upwards against gravity, or it produces an unexpected non-rhythmic sound, HADD fires instantly.
And tells us what?
It generates this immediate visceral intuition that an invisible entity with specific desires and intentions caused that event. It bypasses logical deduction entirely.
It's the ultimate who goes there reflex.
Yes.
It's the reason why when I'm home alone and the house settles and a floorboard creaks, my first thought is never, Ah, the temperature drop is causing the wood to
Of
contract.
course not.
My first thought is literally, someone is in the hallway.
And your heart rate elevates before you have even had time to articulate that thought. That is HADD in action. And while HADD provided this massive adaptive edge by preparing early humans for an ambush, it was profoundly oversensitive by design.
Because it had to be.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how this oversensitivity led to a massive cognitive spillover.
Hmm.
Early humans didn't just see hidden agency in rustling bushes or creaking floorboards.
They started seeing it everywhere.
Yes. As our cognitive capacities grew, we scaled that agency detection up to macro-level environmental phenomena.
Okay, so this is where it jumps from avoiding predators to inventing gods.
Precisely.
Because if the bush rustling had a hidden agent behind it, then the sky roaring with thunder must have a massive, incredibly powerful agent behind it.
The scaling is inevitable. When an earthquake shook the ground, or a sudden drought ruined the foraging grounds, or, a disease swept through an encampment,
Those are huge events.
they are. And they were not interpreted as blind physical stochastic processes. Our ancestors' hyperactive agency detectors interpreted them as deliberate, intentional acts performed by unseen entities.
But wait, why would we assume those unseen entities care about us? If there's a weather god, why assume the weather god is angry at me specifically?
Because of another uniquely human cognitive adaptation, which is our theory of mind.
Theory of mind.
Yes, theory of mind is our ability to read social intentions. It's the capacity to understand that other people have beliefs, desires, motives, and emotional states that are entirely different from our own.
Because humans are super social.
We are intensely, uniquely social creatures. We navigate highly complex tribal hierarchies. Our survival depended just as much on understanding the political dynamics of our tribe as it did on avoiding leopards.
Right, we had to know who was angry with us, who was trying to steal our food, who was forming an alliance.
So we naturally applied this sophisticated social software, our theory of mind, to the unseen agents that HADD was detecting in the environment.
Oh, I see.
The logical extension of attributing agency to natural randomness is the assumption that these massive, unseen environmental agents operate under the exact same social and moral principles that we do.
So we basically tried to negotiate with the weather.
We turn the physical universe into a moral, social arena. Suddenly, a natural disaster isn't just a tectonic shift. It is perceived as a divine punishment for a social transgression.
Like we broke a rule, so the earth shook.
Exactly. And an abundant harvest isn't just a lucky break with the rainfall, it's a reward for tribal virtue. We assumed the universe was keeping score, because keeping score is what humans do.
That evolutionary history is deeply compelling. It makes total sense why a fragile species on a really dangerous savanna would develop that software.
It was highly adaptive.
But it makes me wonder how this ancestral wiring manifests in our modern brains right now. I mean, we aren't dodging saber-toothed tigers anymore.
Most of us aren't.
Right. So does this instinct to find purpose and randomness start at birth, or is it something we are taught by our culture? Like, are we literally just born assuming the universe has a moral agenda?
The developmental psychology research cited in Sertuch's paper strongly suggests that we are born with it. This orientation toward intentional purpose isn't something we are taught. It is the absolute default state of human cognition.
Wow, the default state.
Yes. The paper relies heavily on research led by the cognitive scientist Deborah Kellerman. Her work demonstrates that children exhibit a phenomenon she termed promiscuous teleology.
Promiscuous teleology. Okay, that is quite the academic phrase. You're going to have to break that down for us.
Absolutely. So teleology is a concept originating in philosophy. It is the explanation of phenomena by the purpose they serve, rather than by postulated physical causes.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, a non-teleological explanation for a fork is that it is shaped metal with prongs. A teleological explanation is that it exists to stab food.
It focuses on the job it does.
Exactly. And promiscuous, in this specific psychological context, simply means unconstrained and indiscriminate.
Okay, so children have an unconstrained tendency to view literally everything as being explicitly designed for a specific function, like assuming everything in the world has a job to do.
Yes, everything. Kellerman designed a series of fascinating studies to test this. She would bring young children into a room and present them with natural objects or describe natural phenomena, and then simply ask them to explain why those things existed.
And what did they say?
Time and time again, the children would routinely endorse teleological assertions. For example, they would confidently assert that clouds are for raining.
Ugh,
They would say that rocks are pointy so that animals won't sit on them.
That is hilarious.
They would claim that the sun radiates heat specifically to keep people warm.
That is genuinely adorable. It reminds me of my nephew, who once told me that the moon follows his dad's car so they don't get lost.
It is very charming, but it reveals a profound cognitive baseline. The children naturally assigned a deliberate design and a human-centric purpose to blind natural mechanics.
But I have to push back a little here. I mean, sure, kids think like that. Kids also think monsters live in the closet and that if they eat a watermelon seed, a vine will grow in their stomach.
That's true.
But adults grow out of it once they learn basic science, right?
Okay.
By the time we hit high school, we learn about the water cycle. We know clouds aren't for raining. They're just condensed water vapor interacting with atmospheric pressure.
We learn the mechanisms.
Exactly. We learn geology, so we know rocks are pointy because of erosion, not to poke animals. Doesn't education overwrite that childhood software?
It seems like it should, but the cognitive science indicates that formal scientific literacy only suppresses this baseline bias. It fundamentally does not erase it.
Wait, really?
Yes, the intuitive assumption of purpose remains intact as a lifelong cognitive default, just running quietly in the background.
Even in highly educated, scientifically literate adults, how could they possibly prove that? I mean, if you ask an adult why it rains, they are going to give you the scientific answer.
Okay, well, if they have time to think. Researchers tested this exact phenomenon using what are called speeded cognitive tasks.
Speeded tasks, like forcing them to answer quickly.
Precisely. They brought in scientifically literate adults, including individuals with advanced degrees, and forced them to make rapid causal judgments under strict time constraints. The participants were flashed statements on a screen and had only a fraction of a second to categorize them as true or false.
So they basically didn't have the processing time to access their slower, methodical, scientific knowledge.
Exactly. And when forced to rush, when the executive control functions of the brain didn't have the milliseconds required to suppress the initial instinct, scientifically unwarranted teleological explanations came rushing back.
Oh my God.
Highly educated adults would mistakenly endorse statements like, "The sun radiates heat to nurture life," or "Trees produce oxygen so animals can breathe."
Instead of just saying trees produce oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis.
Right. Under pressure, they reverted immediately to the childhood default of promiscuous teleology.
That is wild. The brain defaults to purpose before it defaults to physics.
It does. Furthermore, the researchers looked at adult populations suffering from conditions like Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, what happens there?
Well, Alzheimer's often compromises executive inhibitory control. That's the part of the frontal lobe that actively suppresses our intuitive associative biases. As that suppression mechanism degrades, promiscuous teleology reemerges strongly.
So they go back to thinking like the kids.
Yes. Yeah. Patients will begin to articulate the world in the exact same purpose-driven ways that Kellerman's young children did.
So beneath all our education, beneath our physics degrees and our rational modern worldview, our brains are basically still holding tightly onto the idea that rocks are pointy for a reason.
We never truly let it go. And evolutionary theorist David Stamos connects this lifelong teleological bias to a broader biological concept called neocanine.
Neoteny.
Yes, neoteny is the evolutionary retention of juvenile traits into adulthood.
I think I've heard of this in terms of physical traits, right? Like how adult humans have relatively flat faces and less body hair, which makes us look more like infant chimpanzees than adult chimpanzees.
Humans are a highly neotenous species physically, but Stamos argues that we are also highly neotenous cognitively.
Meaning we keep our childhood brains.
In certain respects. The prolongation of childlike teleological reasoning into adult cognition is what allows humans to incessantly ask the big existential questions. Our universal adult quest to find a macro-level meaning of life is, neurologically speaking, just the neotenous expansion of a toddler assuming the sun shines specifically to keep us warm.
We are just big kids asking why the sky is blue, but we've upgraded the vocabulary to ask why we exist at all.
That's a very good way to put it.
Okay, so if we possess this deep-seated biological belief that everything has a purpose, and we pair that with the evolutionary hardware that assumes unseen agents are operating on a moral level, then encountering random, senseless tragedy must completely break our brain.
It creates a massive crisis of processing.
I mean, if we are wired to believe that A causes B for a reason, how do we cope with the cognitive dissonance when something awful happens for literally no reason?
It's a huge problem for the brain.
Like if a child gets sick with a rare disease, or a tornado wipes out a single house on a block and leaves the rest untouched. How do we resolve that?
That brings us to a massive psychological framework detailed in the paper. how we construct and defend the illusion of control. To understand this, Sertouche leans heavily on the work of the social psychologist Melvin Lerner.
Okay, who is Melvin Lerner?
He formulated the just world hypothesis in the 1960s.
The just world hypothesis? I feel like I've heard the term thrown around, usually when people are talking about karma.
It is deeply related to the concept of karma. Lerner posited that humans possess a fundamental, virtually non-negotiable psychological need to believe that we inhabit a predictable, just world.
A just world.
A world where people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. Good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people.
But, I mean, anyone who has lived on this planet for more than a few years knows that isn't objectively true. We see bad people succeed and good people suffer all the time.
Constantly.
So why is the need to believe this so strong if the evidence contradicts it every single day?
Lerner argued that this belief isn't just a nice, comforting thought. It actually functions as an essential, load-bearing cognitive buffer.
A buffer against what?
Against total despair. Think about the implications of the alternative. If the world is purely random, and hard work, ethical behavior, and careful planning do not actually protect you from random tragedy, then the motivation for long-term goal investment collapses.
Right, because why bother?
Exactly. Why spend years studying for a degree? Why save money? Why act pro-socially toward your neighbors if a random brain aneurysm or a freak accident can just erase you tomorrow, regardless of your moral standing?
That's depressing.
If we truly internalize the randomness of the universe, self-regulation and pro-social behavior start to feel futile. We absolutely need the just world belief to function in a complex society.
Okay, so if we require this belief to function, think about the last time you heard about a horrific random accident. Here's where it gets really interesting. Say, someone gets T-boned at an intersection by a drunk driver. They were driving safely, doing everything right, and their life is ruined in a second. When people see an unprovoked tragedy like that, how do they actually react? Do we accept the randomness, or does that just world mechanism kick in to protect us?
The just world mechanism kicks in, and it often does so very aggressively. When individuals encounter arbitrary tragedy that befalls an innocent person, their belief in a just world is severely threatened.
Because it proves bad things happen to good people.
Right, and the cognitive dissonance is painful. To resolve that dissonance, observers frequently engage in non-rational cognitive strategies. The most prevalent and disturbing of these is known as imminent justice reasoning, which very frequently manifests as victim derogation.
Victim derogation. You mean we blame the victim?
You blame the victim.
Yeah.
Rather than accepting that a freak accident occurred by sheer mathematical chance, which would mean that we too are vulnerable to mathematical chance, observers instinctively infer that the victim must have engaged in covert bad behaviors that warranted the outcome.
Think about the car accident analogy I just used. It is incredibly common for the first response to a story like that to be, well, were they texting? Were they speeding? Why were they driving so late at night?
Yes.
We immediately look for the flaw in their behavior.
We do. By framing the random tragedy as a penalty for a specific behavior, the observer creates an existential shield for themselves. They generate an illusion of control.
Because if the victim caused it, it's not random anymore.
Exactly. The subconscious logic goes like this. If bad outcomes are caused by bad actions, then I can avoid disaster simply by adhering to good behaviors. I don't text and drive. I don't go out late. Therefore, I am safe.
That is incredibly dark. We would rather assume a victim is secretly a bad person or at least careless than believe that we are vulnerable to random tragedy.
We need to feel safe.
So we basically throw them under the bus to protect our own sense of safety.
It is a profound and often cruel self-defense mechanism. And there is actual concrete neuroimaging proof to back up how powerful this is.
Really? Brain scans?
Yes. Researchers have used fMRI scans to observe the brains of individuals while they process scenarios of random injustice. The studies reveal that maintaining a strong belief in a just world actually suppresses threat activity within a specific region of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or the VMPFC.
The VMPFC, what does that part of the brain normally do?
The VMPFC is heavily involved in processing risk, fear, and emotional regulation. When you are faced with a severe existential threat, the VMPFC lights up. It processes the dread.
Okay, so it's the alarm system.
Right. And what the neuroimaging shows is that when people engage in victim blaming, when they successfully rationalize a tragedy as being deserved, the threat signals in the VMPFC physically calm down.
Wait, the brain physically sedates itself by blaming the victim?
It does. Upholding the idea of a just world physically shields us from debilitating existential dread. It acts as a neurological analgesic.
A painkiller.
Yes. It transforms an indifferent, unpredictable universe into a moral arena governed by understandable rules. That is the psychological engine behind our constant search for meaning. We desperately need human actions to possess cosmic weight because the alternative is neurologically intolerable.
I am marveling at the neurobiology of this, but I want to take a step back and look at the macro level, because it can't just be an internal brain function. It has to show up in how we organize ourselves as groups.
It definitely does.
How have entire societies built cultures around this desperate need to moralize randomness?
It scales up dramatically, and ethnographic fieldwork provides stunning empirical proof of this dynamic in action. Surtush's paper highlights a classic landmark study in anthropology conducted by E. Evans Pritchard in the 1930s.
Okay, what did he study?
He lived with and studied the Azande people of Central Africa, and his findings perfectly encapsulate how human cultures invent complex systems to reconcile physical randomness with moral justification.
I love this example from the paper. Can you lay out the scenario Evans Pritchard observed?
The central observation revolved around a very specific, tragic event: the collapse of a wooden granary.
A granary, like for storing food.
Yes. In Azande culture at the time, grain was stored in heavy wooden structures elevated on pillars. Because they provided excellent shade from the harsh sun, people would frequently sit underneath these granaries during the heat of the day.
Just to cool off.
Exactly. Now, the Azande fully understood the physical mechanics of structural decay. They knew that termites lived in the region, and they knew that termites ate wood, slowly weakening the pillars over time.
Okay, so they weren't ignorant of physical cause and effect. They knew exactly how the structures degraded.
They understood the physical physics perfectly, but on one particular occasion, a termite-eaten granary collapsed at the exact moment that specific individuals were sitting beneath it, tragically crushing them.
Oh, wow.
The Azande understood the termites caused the collapse, but to explain the event, they invoked witchcraft.
No, wait. If I'm an anthropologist observing this, my first thought is, why bring witchcraft into it if you already have the termite explanation? It seems redundant.
It seems redundant to a modern, strictly scientific mindset, but it is deeply necessary for the meaning-making brain. The Azande utilized what anthropologists term dual causality.
Dual causality.
They did not use witchcraft to explain how the granary collapsed. If you asked them, they would say the termites ate the wood.
Yeah.
The physical mechanism was clear, but witchcraft was invoked to explain why it collapsed at that precise second onto those specific people.
They needed a reason for the timing, the intersection of the two events.
Exactly. Physical causality explains the mechanism. Moral causality explains the timing and the target. For the Azande, mere coincidence, the idea that the termites happened to finish eating the final millimeter of wood at the exact mathematical second someone happened to be sitting there seeking shade.
That's just too random.
It was an unacceptable explanation for personal misfortune. They needed an agent, an intentional moral force, in this case, witchcraft initiated by a rival or an enemy, to explain the random intersection of those two independent physical timelines.
That is brilliant. It perfectly isolates our discomfort with coincidence. We can accept the physics of the tragedy, but we demand a moral author for the timing of it.
Yes, we need someone to blame.
But I have to ask, is this just an anthropological quirk of the Azande, a specific cultural adaptation to their environment? Or is this dual causality, this need for a moral author, foundational to Western thought as well?
It is everywhere.
Do we have our own versions of the collapsing granary?
We absolutely do. It is deeply foundational to Western thought, and you can see this continuous struggle play out explicitly within the theology of the major world religions. The paper breaks down the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible to illustrate this point.
The Bible tackles this.
Very directly. Surtush frames these ancient texts not just as religious doctrine, but as a live, ongoing, centuries-long debate over randomness, suffering, and the just world hypothesis.
How does the paper map that debate across the texts?
Let's look at the progression through three specific books: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. First, the book of Proverbs. Proverbs represents classical retributive justice. It asserts a world of strict, predictable moral order.
Like, follow the rules and you'll be fine.
The central thesis is that if you perform good, righteous actions, you are consistently rewarded with health, wealth, and long life. If you perform bad actions, you inevitably suffer ruin. Outcomes are mapped directly and proportionally onto human moral action. Randomness is essentially denied.
So Proverbs is basically the ultimate ancient expression of Melvin Lerner's just world hypothesis. Do good, get good. It's the cognitive buffer operating at maximum strength.
Yes, it is the buffer formalized into text. But then, as the cultural thought evolves, you turn to the book of Ecclesiastes.
And what does Ecclesiastes say?
This text represents a massive conceptual shift and a crisis of meaning. The author of Ecclesiastes observes the real world and explicitly rejects the simplistic moral causality of Proverbs. They note that outcomes are frequently decoupled from moral merit.
Meaning good people suffer and bad people win.
Exactly. There is a famous passage where the author writes that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor does wealth come to the brilliant, but time and chance happen to them all.
Time and chance happen to them all. That is an explicit, profound acknowledgement of stochastic volatility. That is the writer looking at the collapsing granary and saying, hey, sometimes the termites just eat the wood and there is no witch. It's just time and chance.
And is a radical acknowledgement of randomness for its time. And then you reach the book of Job, which serves as the ultimate agonizing deconstruction of the just world paradigm.
Job is the guy who loses everything, right?
Yes. The narrative of Job is designed to stress test the entire system. Job is introduced as an explicitly righteous, upright man who does everything right. Yet he suffers catastrophic, completely unmerited ruin. He loses his health, his wealth, and all his children in a series of bizarre disasters.
And what happens next is incredibly telling from a psychological perspective, right? His friends show up.
Yes. Job's friends arrive, and for 22 consecutive chapters, they sit with him and act as dogmatic, relentless proponents of the just world hypothesis.
They victim blame him.
They systematically victim blame him. They argue that because God is just and the world is orderly, Job must have committed terrible secret sins. They reason that the divine order would not permit such immense suffering without a corresponding moral cause.
They can't accept that it's random.
They are terrified of the cognitive dissonance his random suffering provokes. If Job is truly innocent, then they are not safe.
It's a VMPFC reacting. They are trying to soothe their own dread by accusing him. You must have been texting and driving, Job.
Precisely. The text is a psychological masterclass in victim derogation. But at the climax of the book, God speaks in the whirlwind and explicitly rejects the friends' retributive accounting.
Oh, really? God tells them they're wrong.
Yes. Interestingly, God does not offer Job a neat moral reason for the suffering. Instead, God highlights the vast, non-human scale of creation, the foundations of the earth, the cosmos, the wild, chaotic animals like the Leviathan. The text asserts a divine order that completely transcends narrow, human-centric moral calculations of reward and punishment.
So the book of Job is essentially an ancient sacred text telling us that our desperate need to tie every disaster to a moral failing is just wrong, that the universe does not operate on our transactional scales.
It's a very difficult lesson.
That is a heavy, heavy realization for a culture to grapple with. And it makes me wonder, when humanity finally started to collectively, on a societal level, challenge this just world illusion in the real world, like, when did the societal dam break?
The historical flashpoint for that fracture, the moment Western society was forced to confront the inadequacy of the just world model en masse, can be traced to a very specific day. November 1st, 1755.
The Lisbon earthquake.
Yes, the disaster on All Saints' Day. It is difficult to overstate the psychological, cultural, and philosophical impact of this specific event.
Set the scene for us.
At the time, Lisbon was one of the wealthiest, most prominent, and most devoutly Catholic cities in Europe. On the morning of November 1st, a massive earthquake struck. This was immediately followed by a devastating tsunami that engulfed the harbor, and then a firestorm that raged through the ruins for days.
And the timing of it is what makes it so philosophically devastating, isn't it? It was All Saints' Day.
The timing was the absolute catalyst for the crisis. Because it was a major holy day, thousands of faithful citizens were assembled inside the city's grand stone churches when the earthquake struck. The massive stone roofs collapsed, crushing the congregations.
Oh my God.
Meanwhile, the brothels and the less reputable areas of the city, which were largely built of flexible wood, suffered significantly less damage.
Okay, so think about the cognitive dissonance of the survivors. You have a deeply religious population. They are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, worshiping on a holy day.
Right.
And they are wiped out in an instant, while the perceived sinners largely survive. So what does this all mean for society at that moment? How did they try to process that?
It triggered a philosophical crisis across the entirety of Europe. Initially, the clergy doubled down on traditional theodicy. the vindication of divine goodness in the face of evil.
So they blamed the victims.
They argued, much like Job's friends, that the earthquake was divine retribution for Lisbon's hidden sins. They tried to force this unprecedented arbitrary tragedy into the familiar, comforting box of moral retributive logic.
They needed the witch to explain the granary.
They desperately needed the moral causality. But the sheer scale of the horror and the arbitrary nature of the death toll caused a massive fracture in the intellectual community. This is the moment Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau entered the historical debate, and their exchange fundamentally alters Western thought.
What was Voltaire's reaction?
Voltaire was deeply shaken. He wrote his famous poem on the Lisbon disaster, and in it, he violently attacks the optimistic, providential beliefs of the era, the idea that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds.
He wasn't buying it.
He looked at the crushed children in the churches and declared that the catastrophe was a blind, meaningless, cruel act of physical nature. He argued forcefully that there was no moral justification, no hidden divine lesson in the suffering. It was just brutal physics.
He basically looked at the collapsing granary and said, "It's just termites, guys. There is no witch. The world is just dangerous."
Exactly.
And how did Rousseau respond to that? Because he didn't go back to the religious explanation, did he?
No, he didn't. Rousseau countered Voltaire, but he did so by reframing the disaster entirely through the lens of human responsibility, rather than divine intent or blind cruelty.
How so?
Rousseau argued that nature built the earthquake, yes, but humanity built the fragile, multi-story stone buildings. Humanity chose to pack them tightly together in a dense urban center. He shifted the focus from divine punishment to bad architecture and urban density.
Wait, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rousseau is basically inventing the modern sociological and scientific approach to disaster response.
He is. This specific debate is considered a primary catalyst for the Enlightenment. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake shattered the classical providential models in Western philosophy. It forced the intellectual shift away from moralizing natural events, assuming the earth shakes because we sin, toward naturalistic, geological, and probabilistic paradigms.
So we started studying the earth instead of our sins.
It gave birth to seismology. It ushered in the modern approach to disaster, which focuses on physical mechanics, structural engineering, and risk assessment, rather than moral causality.
Okay, so the Enlightenment happened, we figured out plate tectonics, we invented building codes, and we supposedly stopped blaming earthquakes on our personal sins.
Right, supposedly.
But Sertuche's paper argues that we didn't actually stop doing this. We still engage in this exact same behavior today. We just swapped out the vocabulary. We traded the phrase divine retribution for the free market.
You are touching on one of the most critical modern manifestations of this cognitive architecture. According to the research compiled here, the psychological tendency to moralize random outcomes did not disappear. It simply migrated.
It migrated to economics.
It extends directly into our modern economic systems and our justifications for social stratification. Sertuche posits that belief in a just world operates today as a profound ideological justification for socioeconomic inequality under neoliberal systems.
How does he frame that? Because people generally believe that wealth comes from hard work, not from a cosmic moral judgment.
The paper argues that the two concepts have become deeply intertwined. The data presented on how we view wealth and poverty is striking. Empirical meta-analyses show that individuals who score high on a belief in a just world exhibit a very strong correlation with victim-blaming attitudes regarding poverty. The effect size in these studies is 0.68.
Let me stop you there just to give some context to that number. In psychological research, an effect size of 0.68 is substantial.
It's massive.
It means there is a highly predictable, highly measurable link between someone believing the world is inherently fair and that same person looking at an individual living in poverty and saying, it's your own fault.
It is a robust statistical link. Poverty, unemployment, or systemic structural disadvantages are routinely rationalized by observers as the natural consequence of individual laziness, a moral deficit, or poor choices.
Right, because to admit otherwise is terrifying.
Exactly. Returning to Lerner's hypothesis, if the world is just and you are poor, you must have done something wrong to deserve it. The alternative, that the economic system is random or rigged, is too threatening to the observer's own sense of financial security.
Right. And it works in reverse, too. We look at a billionaire, someone who inherited vast wealth or got incredibly lucky with a market fluctuation, and we essentialize their extreme wealth as a direct marker of personal virtue, superior intellect, and incredible work ethic.
We assume they're just better people.
We treat the random lottery of birth, who your parents are, what zip code you were born into, as a moral meritocracy. It's the exact same logic as the ancient savannah or Joe's friends, just applied to bank accounts.
Sertouche argues that it is the exact same cognitive software, and this scales up to the macroeconomic level. Cross-national economic studies reveal something fascinating. Entire cultures characterized by high aggregate levels of just world beliefs actually tolerate significantly higher levels of structural income inequality.
Tolerating inequality meaning they don't demand wealth redistribution or stronger social safety nets.
Correct. The researchers used Gini coefficients to measure this.
What's a Gini coefficient?
The Gini coefficient is a statistical measure of economic inequality in a population, where 0 represents perfect equality and 1 represents absolute inequality. The data shows that societies with high just world beliefs have Gini coefficients that average 0.09 points higher than cultures with lower just world beliefs.
What does a 0.09 difference actually look like in the real world? It sounds small.
It is functionally massive. A 0.09 difference is roughly the gap in inequality between a highly egalitarian Nordic country, like Sweden or Norway, and a highly stratified society, like the United States or certain developing nations.
Oh, wow.
It represents a massive difference in how wealth is distributed and how poverty is managed.
So a society that deeply collectively believes you get what you deserve will literally construct an economic system with wider, more brutal gaps between the rich and poor because they inherently believe the poor deserve their suffering and the rich have earned their excess.
Yes, the belief shapes the reality.
That is a heavy structural consequence for a biological glitch.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder how this plays out on an individual demographic level. We all face the random lottery of life, and we all live in these economic systems. But do we all process the randomness the same way? For instance, does your gender affect how you process a random crisis?
Empirical research, highlighted in the paper, indicates very clear demographic variations, particularly regarding gender, and how meaning is constructed and recalibrated when a major life event disrupts our expectations.
Really, men and women handle it differently.
The data shows distinct trajectories for how women and men handle severe life stressors, bereavement, or the sudden realization that the world is not just.
What is the mechanism behind that? Are we talking about evolutionary roles or modern socialization?
It is likely a complex interplay of both, but the behavioral outcomes are well documented. Studies demonstrate that in the wake of severe stress, women are statistically more prone to shift toward an external locus of control.
An external locus of control meaning they believe outside forces, rather than their own actions, dictate outcomes.
Yes. They consistently report higher levels of supernatural belief during crises, and they display much higher engagement with relational meaning-making processes.
Relational meaning-making.
Yes, when the illusion of a just world breaks, say during a sudden bereavement, women tend to internalize the emotional struggle and process the crisis through deep internal reflection, emotional processing, and leaning heavily on communal social bonding networks.
They seek out connection to make sense of the noise. They gather together to process the randomness.
They recalibrate their sense of meaning communally. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, this aligns with ancestral survival strategies where female kin networks and social cohesion were primary mechanisms for navigating environmental threats and ensuring the survival of offspring when the environment became unpredictable.
What about men? How does the data show men responding to the breakdown of the just world illusion?
Men, conversely, are significantly more likely to retain an internal locus of control and attempt to externalize existential disruptions.
Externalize how?
Through action. During periods of existential crisis, such as midlife transitions, when the randomness, aging, or unfairness of life becomes unavoidably apparent, men frequently attempt to reestablish a sense of agency through instrumental behavioral shifts.
Okay, what does that look like?
They try to exert physical control over their environment to prove they are still the agents of their own destiny.
Okay, so this is the classic, stereotypical midlife crisis. The universe feels random and terrifying, so a man buys a sports car, trains for a marathon, or drastically changes careers.
Yes, exactly.
It's an attempt to prove I am driving this machine, not the universe.
It is a physical assertion of control in the face of stochastic dread. The data shows they focus intensely on career goals or new achievement metrics, exhibiting lower rates of extended emotional introspection compared to women.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, longitudinal research on psychological entitlement shows that across age brackets, men report significantly higher levels of self-entitlement. They inherently perceive themselves as deserving of specific privileges and positive outcomes.
And I imagine that sense of baseline entitlement directly shapes how they evaluate the fairness of the universe when things inevitably go wrong.
It absolutely does.
Because if you feel highly entitled to success, a random failure isn't just bad luck. It feels like an offensive, targeted violation of the cosmic order.
Precisely. It fundamentally alters the existential arithmetic. Women, statistically, prioritize communal frameworks and social support as their core source of meaning when the world proves to be random. Men frequently rely on agentic achievement, attempting to bend the environment to their will to prove they can still manipulate a random universe.
So if the universe is fundamentally random, and our inherent biological need to find a reason for everything is just an evolutionary illusion designed to keep us from getting eaten, how do we find genuine meaning without lying to ourselves?
That is the big question.
If we are educated enough to know that the just world hypothesis is a cognitive trick, and that the termites are just termites, how do we live with the cold reality of pure stochastic noise without falling into total despair?
That is the ultimate existential question raised by Sartusha's work. And the source material looks to culture, and specifically to art, as the secondary cognitive arena where humans actually process this unbearable tension.
Gart.
Yes. When religious theodicy or economic justifications fail to explain the randomness, we turn to artistic expression. And the historical emergence of the American blues provides a profound, real-world cultural case study of this.
The blues. I love that this scientific paper dives into music history. How does the blues connect to our cognitive architecture?
The blues is deeply rooted in the historical experience of African Americans in the post-Reconstruction South, specifically the Mississippi Delta. It emerged from an environment of sharecropping and forced labor where labor was violently exploited and where moral righteousness categorically did not yield material reward.
It was a brutal reality.
It was a daily lived environment that proved, continuously and violently, that the just world hypothesis was a lie.
So the people creating this music couldn't rely on the do good, get good logic of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Because they were doing the work and they were still being crushed by the system.
Exactly. The cognitive buffer of the just world was structurally denied to them. And unlike traditional spirituals or religious hymns that promised cosmic compensation in an afterlife, which is essentially a delayed just world scenario, the blues frequently confronted the harsh, unvarnished reality of arbitrary suffering, bad luck, and unpredictable fate head-on.
They just laid it all out there.
Philosophers and cultural critics often compare the ethos of the blues to Albert Camus's concept of the myth of Sisyphus.
Sisyphus, the Greek myth where the guy is cursed to push a massive boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down and he has to do it again forever.
Yes.
Camus said that Sisyphus must be imagined as happy because the act of pushing the boulder itself is the rebellion.
Yes. An explicit acknowledgement of life's absurdities and random cruelties. The blues functions similarly, but rather than inventing an illusory moral justification for the suffering or waiting for divine retribution, the blues constructs meaning through the artistic expression itself.
So the song is the meaning.
By singing openly about heartbreak, poverty, floods, and betrayal, the performer transforms meaningless, isolating suffering into shared communal beauty. They break out of the cycles of self-blame that the just world hypothesis demands, and they assert their dignity in the face of an indifferent world.
That is incredibly powerful. The act of creating the song is the meaning. You don't need the universe to be fair if you can make it beautiful for 3 minutes. And the paper mentions other artistic movements doing this too, right? Deliberately confronting randomness.
Yes, Sartusha explores several movements. In literature, you see it in noir fiction, which emerged largely after the disillusionment of World War II.
Right, noir is very bleak.
Works, like William Lindsay Gresham's Nightmare Alley, portray human destiny not as a moral arc, but as a series of chaotic events driven by psychological flaws and bad luck. It exposes the raw randomness of fate, showing the tragic failure of characters who think they can outsmart or manipulate the universe through hubris.
And what about in music?
In music, a prime example is the 20th century composer John Cage. Cage famously introduced aleatoric principles into his art.
Aleatoric meaning chance or randomness, right?
Yes. For pieces like his Music of Changes, he literally utilized the I Ching in ancient Chinese divination text, using coin tosses to determine the pitch, duration, and dynamics of his musical compositions.
Wait, he literally used random chance flipping coins to write a symphony.
Deliberately, he invited pure, unadulterated chance into his art. By doing so, he forced his audiences to sit and find aesthetic beauty and meaning in unorganized, mathematically random noise.
That is wild.
It was a direct, aggressive challenge to the traditional Western assumption that art, and by extension, a meaningful human life, must be an act of total rational control imposed by a master agent.
Finding meaning in randomness feels like the ultimate rebellion against our biological programming. Our brains, our VMPFC, our HADD, they are all screaming at us to find the hidden agent, find the moral reason, to blame the victim so we feel safe.
Right.
And John Cage is tossing coins and saying, no, just listen to the chaos and find the beauty in it. It takes a massive amount of mental maturity to do that.
It does. And that brings us to the final, critical evaluation of this hypothesis. Psychological studies evaluating adult ego development, or ED, and meaning in life, abbreviated as MELA, demonstrate that our capacity for meaning-making is not static.
It changes.
It evolves significantly over our lifespan, provided we engage in the necessary introspection.
So we aren't hopelessly trapped in the promiscuous teleology of childhood forever. We can actually grow out of needing the universe to have a reason.
The research indicates we can. The psychologist Jane Lovinger developed a comprehensive theory of ego development. Individuals at early, conventional stages of ego development rely heavily on those simplistic, just world frameworks.
They need the rules.
They demand that good actions yield rewards, and they rely on external rules and authorities to provide meaning. However, adults who successfully reach post-conventional stages of ego development construct meaning in a fundamentally different manner.
Which raises an important question. What does true existential maturity actually look like, according to the data?
Mature cognition accepts the absolute indifference of physical nature. Post-conventional individuals transcend the need for cosmic retributive accounting.
They don't need the universe to be keeping score.
They don't. They readily accept that catastrophic events occur stochastically, and they understand that their own personal virtue guarantees absolutely no material immunity from the tragedies of life.
They accept that the termite ate the granary and it's just bad luck. They don't invent a witch to make themselves feel better.
Yes. And rather than deriving their sense of purpose from an assumed cosmic grand plan or a hidden moral causal system, these adults ground their sense of meaning internally and communally.
So they create it themselves.
They focus on self-continuity, creative expression, intrinsic values, and deep social bonding. Meaning is no longer something to discover hidden in the fabric of the universe. It becomes an active, courageous act of human creation. It is a framework of purpose forged because the universe is unscripted and random, not despite it.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started on the ancient savanna with our hyperactive ancestors jumping at shadows in the bushes just to avoid being eaten.
A long journey.
It really is. We looked at how that survival software evolved into children, assuming the sun shines specifically for them. We examined how that spills over into our modern struggles, causing us to desperately blame victims of tragedy or poverty just to maintain our fragile illusion of control.
The just world hypothesis.
Right. We saw societies grapple with this through witchcraft and ancient texts and witnessed the philosophical breakdown after the Lisbon earthquake. But we ended with the triumph of the blues and the realization that post-conventional maturity allows us to face a cold, random universe and build our own beautiful meaning within it.
It is a profound evolutionary and psychological trajectory, moving from a biological reflex of fear to an active, conscious assertion of human dignity.
It really is. And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over today. If our desperate need to find narrative meaning evolved merely as a defensive shield against the lethal threats of the ancient savanna, and if our highest, most developed psychological maturity requires us to finally step out from behind that shield and accept cold randomness, does that mean our deeply ingrained instinct to ask why is no longer a feature of human evolution, but an obstacle to it?
That is a fascinating thought.
Must we actively fight our own biology to truly appreciate the reality of our lives? Next time something random happens to you, whether it's a burst pipe or a lucky break, I challenge you to catch yourself looking for the reason and instead try just tossing the coin and listening to the noise.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you found this exploration as mind-bending as we did, please hit subscribe on your feed and share this deep dive with that one friend who always loves a good existential debate. Thanks for joining us for Today in the Hypothesis.